Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Menopause Conversations. I'm really delighted to introduce my next guest. I speak to my next guest probably every week, don't I?
Yes.
Yes. And we have the most amazing conversations. I'd like to introduce you today to my sister, the gorgeous Chishani Heaney. Thank you so much for doing this with me.
That's all right. You're welcome.
I really appreciate it. I've been pestering her for absolutely ages, telling her about all the other conversations I've had. So Kishani's actually my older sister. Just throw that one in there.
Thanks.
I'm the middle one. But we wanted to have a chat with everyone today about a subject that is very close to our hearts because we've grown up together. And, you know, we're both in our menopause years right now. There's a 4-year difference between us. For those of you that know, I turned 50 last year, so you can do the maths yourself. But my lovely sister has had what I would call the most awful ordeal when it comes to women's health. Kishani has had endometriosis her whole life, undiagnosed for most of that, only to then experience what I think was just the terrible ending to that misdiagnosis, which was actually to have a surgical menopause. So to go throughout that whole time straight into a surgical menopause, and she very generously has agreed to talk to us about it today to help other women out there who probably are suffering with endometriosis, who might have fibroids, who might have problems with heavy periods. So let's get into it. So Kishani, which feels really funny calling you that. Welcome. Hi. So tell us, when did you first realize, let's talk about the first chapter of your health. When did you first realize there was a problem with your periods and that you had endometriosis? Can you remember?
Yeah, the first time, when my periods started up, they were always heavy and painful. But back then it was just, this is what it is, put up with it. But then I ended up having a period that lasted 2 months consistently. And that was the first sign, I suppose, that, well, we need to be taken seriously. And I had to actually go into hospital to have a transfusion, blood transfusion. And it started from there. So they, no investigations, put me on to chemical hormone, can't remember the name of it now, and left me on it and discharged me after a week. And then when I went back for outpatients, it was, well, so what happens now? Oh, you have to stay on that. Oh, okay.
And was this a hormone to stop you bleeding? So to stop you, excuse me, stop you actually having any periods at all?
If I think back, no, I didn't. Yeah, I was on it for about 6 months. And it was fact, Mum said, oh, you don't want to be on that for too long. So that made me question. And when I had an outpatients appointment, I'm like, well, why do I need to be on this? I'm not happy being on this. And back then, I was in 18, 19. They said, well, your options are you either stay on this or you have a hysterectomy. And it was like, okay. Back then, you did not question them. And it wasn't until I was in my mid to late, and I've always had problems, I always keep going back. And it wasn't until in my mid to late 20s that I actually came across a consultant that actually listened to what I was saying. And that was the first time that it was a eureka moment, to actually listen and just listen to me and my symptoms and go to me, I think you've got endometriosis.
So can you tell us a little bit more about what the symptoms are? I mean, I can remember so clearly that time. So I'll give you what your symptoms were like for me.
Yeah.
But you tell us what it was like for you. What were the symptoms?
It was just immense pain and it was immense pain every month. And this being bloated the whole time, you know, that didn't disappear. That would never disappear. I would look like I was 3 months pregnant, you know, and then you'd have the pain every month. I just I didn't deal with it, but I just carried on, you know, as you had to back then. I didn't take any time off work for 20 years. I was still going to work with the pain. I would manage it, but it was difficult, really difficult. And you could tell that I was in pain. You know, anybody who knew me would say I'd be white. My face would be absolutely so pale, and the pain would just keep coming in waves and subside and nothing would touch it. No painkillers. I tried, and it got to a point where there's no point taking anything, because I know they're not going to give me the relief that I need.
And did you find those symptoms were throughout the entire month, or were they worse in the first part or second part?
Second part. Yeah, particularly when I was having a period, that's when it got excruciating.
So when you would have started bleeding, it would be terrible pain
all the way through the bleed.
Yes.
No let up.
And so shall we just explain to people what endometriosis actually is for people? So what's your explanation of what endometriosis actually is?
So the technical definition is when the lining of your uterus somehow escapes and gets into your body cavity. And the way I describe it is it's like ivy. So ivy grows everywhere. It attaches to whatever it can get its tendrils on and stick and thrive. And because it's the tissue from your uterus, it acts in the same way regardless of where it is. So whenever you go through a period and you've got endometriosis, it'll do what it does in your uterus. It sheds and you get a bleed, and that is what causes the inflammation and the pain. It's your body trying to fight this tissue that shouldn't be there. And that's basically what it is. So the only way to deal with it is you've got to get rid of that tissue. But if there's one little bit left, it's like ivy. It just keeps going and going and going.
Absolutely. And there is some scientific, I mean, it's a brilliant description, the ivy, because that's exactly how I've described it to people. We'll talk a bit more about your surgery, because you had the most amazing, pioneering, in fact, award-winning surgery, didn't you? You had an amazing consultant at the University College London who we're so grateful to, because he changed your life, really, and truly. But the extent of the endometriosis, they do think actually that what tends to happen is some of the tissues from the uterus actually go back up your ovaries. So instead of the eggs coming down, it actually gets sucked back up the tubes, unfortunately, and then goes up into your bloodstream. I mean, women talk about it being deposited in their backs or, you know, everywhere. And that pain that you get is actually due to prostaglandins, which, like you say, yes, that inflammation. And so that our pain receptors are heightened. So you're in that chronic pain. I mean, this is why we need a women's health policy in the workplace, not just a menopause policy. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm happy about that, but it doesn't go far enough for women like yourself who are in, you know, the hundreds of thousands who either have polycystic ovary condition, who have fibroids, who have endometriosis. So in your case, tell us what happened with your surgery. I mean, because it just went on for years, didn't it? And it wasn't until you were 45. I mean, it's scandalous.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I had initially I had laparoscopic surgeries where they tried to remove the endometrial tissue that they could see. I had a couple of those. It then got to the point where, but they also said that I would need to stay on the pill as well for like 3 months at a time, maybe come off to have a period, but go back on. So I did all of that. But it then got to the point where the pain that I was getting was all the time. There was no, it was getting worse. The pill wasn't helping. So I had to go back. And then eventually I went, got seen by a consultant, and I turned around. This was in 2012. I turned around to him and said, right, I know the reason that this is going on is because of my ovaries. I've had enough, you know, so I would like you to give me a complete hysterectomy, remove everything, because I was at my breaking point. I just couldn't handle it anymore. You know, I wasn't living. I was living from one pain to the next, and that's just no way to live. You know, I just felt I couldn't go anywhere, do anything. So anyway, that's what I want you to do. So I had my surgery, and it was open surgery, and he said, yeah, all went perfectly fine. And that was in August of 2012, and I had about a month where I felt, after I recovered from the surgery, I had about a month that I felt great. And then all of a sudden I got this pain like I have never had before. Bearing in mind, up until that point, I never took time off work because of it. But this pain, I was out, and I felt that it was so bad, I was actually going to collapse. And I actually had to take time off work. And I thought, something's not right here. This is not. And then I was having problems with my bowels. And I'm thinking something's gone on. And I should have thought about it, but I didn't. I was not told that I needed to have any HRT. So the upshot, so I went back, I did some research, and I'm like, my ovaries haven't been taken out. And something happened in that surgery that the consultant didn't tell me about. I went back so I did some research, and it was through research that I found out about UCLH, that have a dedicated team that deal with endometriosis. And I thought, that's where I need to be. I went back to the original consultant and told him that he needs to refer me to this clinic. And he did, grudgingly. And then I had a year with UCLH of tests, exams, and it was only with them did I find out that I had grade 4 endometriosis. And I'm assuming that the grading scales would be similar to, say, cancer. So you've got 1 through to 5. And what had happened was, and I'm assuming this has all been dealt with from that's what happened with from my surgery, but the endometrial tissue had attached itself to my bowel, and it was having an impact on my bowel movements. So the plan was, this is why I had to have a year of tests. The plan was that they would have a team in place, because they would have to resect my bowel to get rid of the portion of my bowel where the endometrial tissue was. And so I went in at 7 o'clock in the morning. Mine was the last operation of the day, and it was an 8-hour operation. So as well as the gynecologists, they had the general surgeon in there to deal with the bowel. They also had the urologists, because they had to make sure that my bladder and everything else was protected and shored up. And yeah, I came out of that surgery and I had an ileostomy. So for those that don't know, that's a stoma. I needed it to allow my bowel to recover from the surgery. And that was where, and I had a bag. That was difficult to deal with, I have to say, but I had to have that for 3 months. And then I had to go back in to have that reversed. And it was, once that was done, and 3 months after, I was then able to start my life again. I was able to start going back to work on a phased return. And yes, it was amazing. There was a bit, because of what I'd gone through in the past, there was a little bit of trepidation, thinking, oh, have they managed to get everything? Am I going to start feeling something again? The pain that I felt before, and it's a particular type of pain. You just know. But so I think for about 6 months, I had that anxiety. But after that, no. And when I was with them, they said, because I've had my ovaries out, I am going to have to go on HRT. So they gave me a prescription, but said, don't start this until 3 months after the last stop. So I did. I thought it would be that would be it. But then you're back into another battle before you know it, when you go to get your prescription from your GP surgery. So, the hospital put me on this particular HRT for a reason. And I'm like, well, that's the one that I want. But the surgery was saying, well, no, we don't prescribe that product. And I'm like, I had to fight. I had to stand my ground and say, but that's what they put me on. And okay, yeah, I mean, I was stubborn, but I'm thinking, no, I'm going to be stubborn. And so I was they eventually gave me that prescription for that particular brand, and I was on that for a period of time. But again, you don't know. You don't know what you should be going through or what you shouldn't be going through. So again, you just accept. I should have questioned, is this right? Is this doing what it needs to be doing for me? But I didn't. And then I changed to another form of HRT, but I just wasn't getting anything. And at the time I was speaking to you about it, and you suggested a gel. And that was amazing. Initially, that was amazing. So great, felt on top of the world once I started that gel. But then things just sort of seemed to spiral down again. And I started noticing it with, like, first of all, my face always looked really oily, and I'm like, what's going on? And then that was from last year. And then more recently, I started getting cystic acne. I'm like, what on earth? all along my chest, and sore with it, And again, I spoke to you, and you suggested that I'll get my hormone levels checked. So I did some research and ordered it online, and it came through, and did it and sent it off. And then the results came back, and we went through them together. And yeah, all 3 of the hormones that women need were basically at rock bottom.
And you're an amazing, highly functioning adult. Your work has been fantastic.
They've been amazing all through this.
Fantastically support. But do you know what though? The thing is, you've taken the minimum amount of time off work. I mean, most women going through this, honestly, they take about 32 weeks off in their entire career. I mean, you would have taken double that, but you didn't, and you're just struggling on, and like you say, constantly battling against the GP. It's like, no, just do as you've been asked to do. You know, I'm not here to deal with your insecurities.
No,
you don't have that knowledge. But I think that's what women are up against, aren't they? It's that you, like you said, you know, we put up, because actually the thought of going to your GP and facing some pointless conversation, coming out and feeling demoralized and deflated, is just too much for a lot of us, isn't it?
It is. I mean, I know it sounds really silly, but I didn't contact my GP about my cystic acne. You know why? Because I know that they'll just stick me on some medication, which is not actually dealing with the cause. They just want to treat the symptom. And
we didn't let that happen, though, did we?
No.
What did we do instead?
So once I got the results and we went through them, I sent them off to my GP, got them, and I asked them to put it on the file. And whilst I was speaking to them, I said that I would like to arrange a consultation with the GP, with whoever within the GP practice is the menopause specialist. And because through talking with you, I need to be getting onto all three of those hormones, not just estrogen. I need progesterone and testosterone. So the surgery did call me back, and the response was that yes, they could prescribe progesterone, but they wouldn't prescribe testosterone. That's outside of their remit. So I'm like, okay, so where do we go then? So they said, well, we can refer you to a specialist clinic and they can deal with all of it for you. So that's what's happened. That's where I am now.
And when we think about, I mean, let's just signpost some of the symptoms, shall we? So cystic acne, which is that acne that really, I mean, you know, it's under the skin, it's painful, and that is too much hormone, you know, too much estrogen usually. Now, in our family genetics, we have something called estrogen dominance. Mm-hmm. We are, the three of us in our family, we definitely know the two of us are estrogen dominant, which means even though all our other hormones are lower, estrogen is still the most dominant one. So it gets to have most of the say. We also know through our genetics that our estrogen tends to hang around a bit too long. So if we supplement with estrogen, we've sort of doubled that effect, if you like, and still halved the effect of progesterone and testosterone. So that's why it's really important that Chishani gets her hormones back. Always keep in mind that three-legged stool. If a stool is designed to be sat upon, you need the three legs to work. There's no point just giving one leg in estrogen. We need the other two legs. Thanks very much. You know, and although lots of people say you don't need testing, maybe you don't need the testing to diagnose perimenopause, but I would say if a woman is coming back and going, I don't feel right, then it's time to do some testing, see what's going on. We've both had our DNA done as well, and that's really insightful, isn't it? But you know, but the reality is getting those levels can say, you haven't got any. Okay, so I need some. So that's really, really important. I mean, I just think it's a travesty. I remember visiting you in hospital that day that you'd had your operation, you'd had your stoma fitted, and I just felt so sad. I felt you'd really been failed, really and truthfully. But then when we got that call from your consultant, we got that email from your consultant saying that he'd actually won an award for your surgery because, like Chishani said, that ivy had wrapped around her bowel and was pretty much strangulating her bowel, you know, which is, you know, could be life-threatening. And yet, you know, nothing had been done about that. And people just, as I always say, aren't joining the dots. You know, if you took the patient as a whole and go, hang on a minute, this young lady has been going on with this for the best part of 25, 30 years. what are we doing about this to sort this out? And so if we pan forward now to 2015, you had your ileostomy reversed, by which we mean that the bowel had rested, it had regenerated, it recuperated, you no longer needed the stoma. And you were so generous. I always remember we had lots of questions we wanted to ask you about that, and actually how you ate. You had to chew your food, didn't you?
Yeah, it was around Christmas time, which was not the best time. And there's things you cannot eat, you have to avoid. And I didn't like going out with it, because you couldn't drink just water, because that would cause it to leak, because water does not get absorbed. Where the stoma was above where water gets absorbed. So I had to mix cordial. In order to get fluids, I had to mix cordial with it, which I really don't like. I mean, you know me, I don't drink cordial. It's water. Yeah. That's it. And that was a struggle. I had to, all the stuff that you have at Christmas, like Christmas pudding, couldn't have it because of the nuts. I couldn't have tomatoes because of the seeds. The same with cucumber. I had to be careful with fibre, and not making sure that I didn't have too much fibre. And as you said, I had to ensure that I chewed everything. So people would be finished all around me, and there's me still going through my plate.
And I remember, because I'm a real talker at dinner time, aren't I? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I can remember you going, I'm not talking, because taking in air, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
You're saying about when you're talking and eating, you're taking in a lot of air. So that's a top tip for people, because in fact that's why a lot of people get a bit bilious, don't they? Or trapped air inside their food, and then that goes into their bowel. But it was such a massive period of adjustment. But if we pan forward to 2015, and then you're on your HRT, this is interesting for people, because I'm constantly just so shocked by the lack of education. I mean, how much counselling did you get about being put into a surgical menopause?
I didn't. There wasn't any.
Which is disgraceful. I mean, we prepare women for having babies, and we tell them what it's going to be like after. People go in for a knee operation, we tell them what that's going to be like. A hip replacement, you're fully aware of what that's going to be like after. So damaging. And we think we're removing one problem only to replace it with another one. What would you advocate to anyone who's listening to this, Chishani, who's either got endometriosis, who's got any one of the myriad of women's health issues? What would you advocate to them for themselves going into any procedure?
What I would advocate to you is do research, but make sure that you're getting your information from trusted sources. Based, if you've got questions, write them down. I would also recommend taking somebody in with you to your consultation meetings, because you may forget things. Even if they're just there as a note taker, it gives you something to be able to, because it can be quite daunting, and you can come out of your meeting with them with your head in a spin. So take somebody in, but questions. And if it's something that's quite significant, and it ends up being like you're having to have significant surgery, ask them what support there will be for you afterwards. Is there any support that they can give you if you're an inpatient? And there might be, but I think you might have to, at this point in time, you might have to ask for it. And don't, if there's something that you don't understand that they're telling you, ask them to explain it in a way that you can understand. And if something's not right, don't accept it. Something doesn't feel right, don't accept it. Listen to what your body is telling you, I think is the biggest thing.
So right, because you know what, we need to remove one phrase out of healthcare altogether. You're too young to have this. You're too old to have this. You are the champion and the best person to know how your body feels. And yes, your level might appear normal, but it's not your normal.
No. That's exactly it.
That's it, isn't it? It's not your normal. So don't keep benchmarking me against everybody else. And this is the same, you know, anything your doctor is advocating for you. Like in my own situation, we talked about this recently. You know, my doctor's telling me, take more HRT, take more estrogen. I'm like, that doesn't work for me. Doesn't work for me. So I think we need a bit more science in it. We need to know, actually, if we're going to advise this patient, what is this patient's system doing? How is she processing her hormones? What's her background level, rather than this broad brushstroke? So let's come back into the workplace now, shall we? And thankfully, your story is continuously resolving. You're going to get this appointment with your menopause specialist. You're armed, you're knowledgeable. You know, that is 9/10 of getting a successful outcome, really and truly. And I would advocate to anybody, if you are unsure, there are some great websites out there. I can thoroughly recommend the Menopause Doctor one or the Balance app, because, you know, the more you can go armed with the information, here's my diary, here's what I've been noticing, it does become sort of irrefutable. It's like, okay. Because the last thing you want is to go and have this appointment and then to be sent away to go and construct a diary. Yeah. So like Chishani said, trust and listen to yourself. So what can we hope for in the workplace? Because I've said to you before we started recording, I'm not a fan of just having a menopause policy. Yeah, hands up, it's a good start. But how would a menopause policy have helped someone like you? Going through all your endometriosis, does it go far enough, Chishani, or do we need something else?
To be honest with you, I mean, so when I was going through my surgeries, I ended up having 2 surgeries with 3 months recovery in between. So I had 2 surgeries within the span of 6 months. And what was always at the back of my mind was, there's going to come a point here where financially, it potentially could be an issue. Now, I was lucky in that my workplace allowed me to work from home. So when I felt okay, I was able to do like half days, which helped. I mean, it must have been an absolute nightmare for the company, keeping track of it, half days here and there. But yeah, they were absolutely brilliant, and they allowed me to do that. But even then, at the end of 6 months, you know, the thought of, I think there needs to be, there are certain conditions that are protected when it comes to sickness and the workplace in law. And I think certain women's conditions should be protected, classes protected as well, because we're the only ones that potentially would end up going through it. And we've got no choice. If it happens to us, it happens to us.
That's so true. And it's not, you know, the menopause policies at best are going to cater for women 35 onwards, possibly. What about women that are much younger than that?
Yeah.
What's there to protect them? So I agree with you completely. I think we're on the same page. I think we need a women's health policy in work with protected characteristics. You know, if you are diagnosed with endometriosis, if you've got primary ovarian insufficiency, if you've got fibroids, if you're infertility, miscarriage, you name it, I think it should be covered within that. Because what I saw of you is your company treated you with compassion.
Yeah.
They treated you with kindness. And what did they get back? a committed employee. I mean, I remember you going, I can't wait to get back to work. I'm going to do a few afternoons. You didn't go back begrudgingly. You went back with a renewed gusto, loyalty, still with your employer. You know, the reality is they got back even more. And I think companies that make the mistake of thinking, well, let's just get them out, that is not how we treat people. And so forth, and therefore it's really important. And you've become an advocate, haven't you, in your own organisation for things like menopause. You know, you're championing for other women, you're advocating for other women, and because not everyone has that strength of voice, do they, Chishani? Not everyone can speak up for themselves. So yeah, I think we agree, don't we? We need something more with protected characteristics, which means that actually, if you're taking time out to have a consultation or having an operation, that is factored in terms of your absence from work in a protected way. And we definitely need to have that for menopause, because here's the thing: if employers think you popping off to see your consultant and getting a year's worth of HRT is going to solve you and fix you, it doesn't work like that. It's a constantly moving target. Why? Because we still have an undercurrent of hormones ourselves. Yes, it's much lower than we need. What if a very period of stress at work comes up? Those hormones could drop potentially even more. You go and have your COVID vaccination. That can send your HRT into a complete spin. That's what happened to me over Christmas. And then you're trying to resolve that constantly. That means another appointment back to see your consultant, either tweaking the doses, doing more tests. It's here to stay. We don't just tick a box, 12 months of prescriptions, you're fixed. No. It doesn't work like that. So Chishani, a couple of things before we finish, because it's been so lovely to speak to you on this topic, just solely on this topic, because we normally talk about so many other things as well. So what would you want for women, all women right now, just in the workplace? What would you want for women that would make these things that they might have to face into bearable?
It's, you know what, it would be what my company have done for me. It would be that compassion. It would be doing, so they went out of their way to allow me to work from home when that wasn't even an option back when I had my hysterectomy and my ileostomy, but they made that happen for me. It is that compassion, it is that consideration. I would like women to feel that they've got support in the workplace. And I think it's not just about women, actually. Men need to understand what it's about. And all right, they're not going to be able to completely understand it, but they might get a slight inkling, because let's be honest, if they're in a partnership, it's potentially going to affect them at some point, isn't it?
Completely. And that is a really important part of it. It's that collaboration, isn't it? You know, if you're managing, your life partner is female or identifies as being female, you know, it's going to happen to them. And like you said, it's going to affect you, you know. But the bottom line is you need to get off the fence.
Yeah.
No good to just say, oh, well, I don't know about that stuff. You need to know about it, because actually behind lots of smiles at work are people fighting battles you have no idea about. And it is
true. It is true. I mean, people that didn't know me would say to me, oh, but you look great. Yeah, no, I'm not.
Yeah. And it took a lot of energy, didn't it? I can remember. And you had a hell of a commute. You used to be up. I mean, what time did you used to get up in the morning to travel to Milton Keynes? You used to get up at 4:30 when you've not been sleeping the night before because you've been having night sweats, hot flushes. And it's no joke.
No, it isn't. It isn't a joke. Doing that 5 days a week.
No. So I agree with you. So I'd like to finish on, you know, what would you put in a time capsule for the future about this time? You know, you've got a niece, my daughter, you know, what would you hope for her going forward in her life in terms of women's health and the way that women's health is treated in work?
I would hope that it changes sufficiently that when a woman goes in with a problem to their GP, that they are listened to. I would hope that there is a more joined up approach to treatment, so that all that should be involved are involved in that treatment. And I think the medical establishment.
So we had a little bit of an interruption of signal there. So Chishani, you were saying about what you would like for the future for the next generations.
So yeah, so just to recap, that any woman in the future who's got an issue, when they go to their GP, they are listened to. They are directed to the right forms of help, and that help is joined up, because it's not necessarily just about one area. It may mean a number of areas need to be involved, a bit like my surgery. And I can't think what the other thing was.
Brilliant. Menopause brain. That's perfect. That's perfect. We need that's what happens, isn't it? Isn't that what
all the time?
We can laugh about it, but that is what happens all the time. It's like, I had a really good thing I wanted to say. I haven't got a Scooby-Doo what it was. But anyway.
Yeah, it's gone.
So that's brilliant. That's gold. And that's so lovely that people, you need to know that that's what happens for absolutely no rhyme or reason. You know, these things we get hijacked by. Got a few gremlins on our recording on a Sunday. Maybe it doesn't like us recording on a Sunday. We've got a few gremlins squeaking in. So Chishani, it's just so wonderful to have had this little chit chat with you. But thank you so much for shining a light on endometriosis, surgical menopause, and as we both advance into post-menopause, I guess. But it's been brilliant. It would be great to have you come back actually to talk about, you know, what you've been able to do with your hormones under the guise of a menopause specialist, what that experience was like.
Yeah.
But that would be wonderful. But from me to you, thank you so much for giving your time. You're on LinkedIn, aren't you?
You're very welcome. I am.
You are. So if anyone wants to connect with Chishani, she's on LinkedIn. You all know that I'm on LinkedIn. Feel free. And we're really both happy to talk about this stuff. But for now, Chishani, thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you again for a part 2.